Hello, everyone. Thanks for listening to Wake Up, Look Up, a podcast where we connect events happening in real time to the gospel of Jesus Christ. I'm Zach Weihrauch. In today's episode, we're asking the question, can you outgrow your family? This is prompted by a New York Times opinion piece I read this week, but actually, it's more prompted by the first chapter of the Gospel of Matthew. That's because the opinion piece itself was commenting on the family tree of Jesus and how complicated it is, how full of tough stories it is, and what we might take away from that. It's actually one of my favorite things to think about and talk about. I want to take a second and maybe be a little more pastoral than news reporter in this episode of Wake Up, Look Up, because I think there's something here for all of us. I don't know if you've spent a lot of time reading the genealogy of Jesus in Matthew chapter 1. If you haven't and you have space, you might hit pause on this episode, go read it, and then come back. But even if you get to it later, what you're going to find is a long list of names, but many of those names show up in the Old Testament, meaning you can read their stories, and their stories are particularly complicated. In fact, there are 4 women in the genealogy of Jesus, and that's pretty rare for the first century. Typically, you would go man to man in the genealogy. You would omit the women for all the reasons you might imagine. But Matthew doesn't do that for Jesus, and he doesn't do that for a reason, because often it's the women who show the men's sinfulness in their stories. Women like Tamar, whose story you can find in Genesis, or Bathsheba, whose story you can find in the writings about David. These are women who were sinned against, women who were victims of pretty awful and heinous things, women whose stories are part of Jesus's family tree, meaning Jesus didn't come from a pristine family. Now, why is that important? Well, really for 2 reasons, and my guess is you need to hear at least one, if not both of these. The first is that in the church, you shouldn't have to hide the shame and struggles of your family. I think sometimes in Christianity, there can be this idea that we need to present an idyllic version of ourselves, at least on Sundays, that even in the things we say to our kids about what they wear, how they act at church, we're wanting to work so hard to present ourselves as, air quotes, perfect families. But why? Where does that come from? It doesn't come from the Bible, and it doesn't come from Jesus, because the very beginning of the very first book about the life of Jesus, he leads with the shame and struggles of Jesus's family. He has violence in his family. He has wickedness in his family. He has marital infidelity, illegitimate children in his family. Matthew is saying, hey, to really understand this guy, you need to understand at least part of where he comes from. And if that's true, if Jesus wasn't hiding the shame and sinfulness of his family, then it isn't him who's encouraging us to do it. Instead, it's our pride, it's our religion, it's the judgment of those around us. But of course, when we do that, we make it so that no one really gets to know us, not the real us, only the sanitized version. But Jesus isn't coming to a sanitized world. He's coming to a real one, a broken one, and he's encouraging us to meet him there. That's something I think a lot of us need to hear. But the second thing is that your future is not determined by your family tree. Jesus comes from a sinful and shameful family, but he isn't sinful or shameful. He is the greatest man to ever live. He's the Son of God, through whom God will redeem all of his people. Jesus shows us that the gospel takes people from broken families and leads them to brighter futures. I wonder how many of us feel as though we are doomed to repeat the mistakes of previous generations, that someone with our last name, someone with our DNA, our genetics can't ever become bigger and better than those who came before us. But that isn't coming from the Bible either. In fact, one of my favorite things in 20 years of pastoral ministry is seeing family trees that are altered when moms and dads, men and women meet Jesus and realize all the of a sudden there's something in them that is stronger than their genealogy, stronger than their DNA, and stronger than their past. Listen, Jesus is coming in Matthew 1. In the midst of a broken family is meant to give you hope. And I hope it will give you hope in the new year. You can transcend your family. You don't need to hide the struggles of your family. And if you're willing to dream in both of those directions, it will be Jesus who meets you and leads you there. Hey, thanks so much for watching this episode of Wake Up, Look Up. While you're here, take a minute to like and subscribe. It really helps us get the word out. Don't hesitate to leave a review wherever you might find this podcast on an audio level and help spread the word. And hey, while you're here, check out all the other content we have at Christ Community Chapel on YouTube. Some of those videos are popping up on the screen now. Click on one.